Here we are back hard at work, another podcast episode. What are we talking about today, Renee?
Oh man, we're talking about money. Money, money, money. Everybody
It,
always talks about money this time of year. Legislature's in session. And of course, for better behavioral health care, what do we need? More money. Or
well,
maybe we don't. I
I
don't know.
don't know. I think I need more money in all aspects of my life. I think I need more money for spring break. I need
Of course.
I
But before we
need
dive into that,
oh,
what is happening on the farm today? I know
I,
there's going to be more. Did you get your farm issues fixed with your corn, or is the corn moving?
I need more money for my corn, right?
Okay.
I've sold corn. Yeah, we had some issues getting it out of the grain bin. That's been an ongoing issue. That's kind of like the conversation we're going to have today, right? Like I have no control over the price per bushel or
Nope.
per pound I get for my crops, right? But I've got to manage somehow within how I market and how I manage that. And, it's not a whole lot different than being a behavioral health provider and providing therapy or medication management, right? You set your
That's right.
rates through contracts.
That's
All of
right.
those rates may be different per
That's right.
company, and then you got to figure out how to deliver that service within the confines of that rate. I guess I don't see it as being so difficult, but boy, it sure is difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. So I know one of the things that you and I talk about a lot, we're going to dive into today. When you talk about those contracts, step one, provider, read it. Know the contract. What's it say? What are you owed? What are you supposed to be billing for? Because sometimes there's things in there that you could be doing to help out that you just didn't know and you need to be paying attention to. I mean, and just like you with your corn, right? You have deadlines in which stuff has to be
Mhm.
delivered, or you have penalties if you don't. So if you didn't read the contract, you might miss that and then lose more money. And so when we get started about this, and we are talking about contracts and rates, that sounds kind of boring. And I always feel bad about in the mental health and maybe substance use too. But when I went to school and all that, we didn't have a lot of business acumen taught to providers. And yet providers are one of the groups that always want to go out independent, always want to start their own shop, hang out their own flag, which is great. But if you don't know how to run the business, this is where this is going to be a problem because there's many times where I could tell stories, we'll get to them in a minute, about where people are set that the rates were wrong, but something happened and your contract fell apart and you didn't pay attention to that. So that's where the money could still be yours, but the contracts weren't in place. So let's talk about where's some of those barriers to rates, because sometimes it's not just about the rate. Sometimes it's about collection, isn't it, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we should just take a step back of why are we talking about rates? Is because this comes up all the time.
All the
I,
time.
I go to states and it's like the first thing that people go and ask their legislators for is you have to raise our rates. Like I've heard it in 3 states now, just in the last month, Renee. And I always kind of scratch my head because one legislator where I was just in a state next to ours, and he said, yeah, it says here the legislative priority is increased rates. He goes, but the governor just handed me this report and it says that we already pay behavioral health providers the highest rates in the country. How
Wow.
can you come here and ask me for more when the governor looked at me and said, we need to lower these rates because we're too high? Um,
Wow.
and so it becomes then they've done a great job of advocating for their rates clearly in this state, and that's a great thing. But if that's still not enough, then it has to be something else. And it's so much harder to talk about this something else. And that's really kind of how we got here today is talking
Yeah,
about, is it
there's
rates?
something
Is it
else.
not rates? Is it contracts? What are all of those other factors that are limiting all of these organizations' ability to be successful? Because we go in and we work with folks who we know that there's executive directors and CEOs of outpatient clinics who have never read their contract.
That's right.
We've affirmed that over and over again. And I just scratch my head and go, what? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
We know that insurance companies sometimes delay payments. We know that disrupted coverage impacts the ability to bill. We know that sometimes billing is overly difficult to manage
Yeah.
and bill and get a payment from. We know that staff are strained in trying to jump through all those bureaucratic hurdles, right? And we know that operational inefficiency just makes it 10 times worse, right?
Right.
When you don't do a note or your notes aren't done for the whole week, and then you have to hurry up and get your notes done, and then that's another week before they can be billed. A good outpatient clinic is going to be billing every day on a constant rhythm because that's going to ensure that cash flow comes in, right? At a
Right.
regular interval.
Right.
Um, so when we think about rates, is it really about the rate, or is there so many other things we should be focused on when it comes to creating impact and making a change?
Right. I know in Iowa, a few of the things that have been worked on, now I don't know if they're fully where we need them to be, is some of those contracts across different managed care organizations being more
Mhm.
similar so that, the contracts themselves are more similar so that it's easier for the provider to work with. They've talked about different things like that. And there's been actual work groups in our state for a bunch of time to trying to get, okay, what across different businesses. And what's hard about that, right? Managed care companies are independent businesses. They don't
Mhm.
have to work with anybody else, but they realize how hard it is. And there's a state with multiple insurances. And so, how can they work together in the parts that they can work together so that things are more similar? So, it's really hard because legislators want to dictate that all managed care have the same whatever. They're a private business, and the legislature
Mhm.
really doesn't have that kind of pull in that space. You can maybe in some areas, since you're doing the contract with the state, and if you're not going to be cooperative, maybe you get moved on out as a company next time the bid's awarded because they're not going to keep you because
Mhm.
you're not cooperating. But that's a long time out. It's a long person's game. It's not like short term. So that's really hard. So when we talk about this too, I mean, when we go out and talk to people that are struggling, they've lost money. We've talked about this on a previous podcast, year over year for a decade, and they didn't even necessarily know where they were with their contracts, right? Or what the rates were, to be fair, but always were saying the rates are too low. Well, did they look at, are they paying people too much? Did they look at, do you have people on full time that should be contracted because they don't have enough work coming in? I mean, all of those different issues matter. You can't just have full-time therapist employees who aren't bringing in a full-time caseload to actually, if they're supposed to be reliant on their cases to be paid, they have to have a full-time caseload. And that's across government. I mean, you and I, well, let me see. I think you were with me when we were in North Dakota and we're standing in some
Yep.
government agencies and they're at like 30 to 50% capacity for their people and then
Mhm.
just bleeding money because people are only working 50% or of the time. And so, there's a lot of factors that talk about rates. It's not just about the legislature and more money.
I think at one of those places, they're actually turning people away because they were too busy, even though they were only seeing people at 30 or 40, 50% of capacity. It
Yeah.
was fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that, we have to approach this as a business, right? A
Yeah.
clinic is a business, and we had an interesting conversation recently with a clinic that had started a best practice of doing some type of screening ahead of time. And I asked, are you billing for that screening? Because that would be an add-on to the service being provided. And the answer was, well, no, we don't get paid enough to even make sense for us to run a claim to bill that. And I said, well, then why do you provide that? Well, why do you do it then?
Why do you do it?
Because it takes time. It takes
Right.
energy away from other aspects. And so maybe it's although I agree it's probably a best practice if it's not viable, then at some point you have to go back and talk to the state or your legislators about we should be doing this, but we can't. That's a better way of talking directly about
Yeah.
rates than
Yeah.
hiding it under something else. It's not
That's right.
about outpatient rates. It's
No.
about doing those additional things that make sense. And this is where it gets all muddied with our legislators. And they're just like, but the report I got says we have the highest rates in the country. Well, this is why, because we don't know how to articulate it. We don't know how to talk about it. And then it confuses everyone. And then people start talking about, well, we're going to cut your rates, which is the exact opposite of what needs to happen in these situations.
Right. And maybe what the governor was intending, there might be one particular billing code that's at the highest rate, and it's only just that one code. So it could
Right.
be maybe it's an outpatient rate where that billing code is higher than the rest of that. But that doesn't mean that in their Medicaid package that they have all the services that they actually should be getting paid for or that they can bill for those things. So those additional things you were mentioning, there may not even be a billing code for them in their state plan. And so again, to your point, they're making, quote, too much money may not really be true. And if they're not, like you say, if they're still doing the service for free and lumping it in, then you're not ever going to see that. And so you've got to kind of pull that apart and look at what's going on. And so those are some of the challenges I personally think with CCBHCs. and that the CMHCs had, so their community health providers, I think they really struggled with bundled rates because they became what we called, the what do they call that? They catch everybody and safety net providers. And so everybody had to come regardless. And so when you start quote bundling rates, that's a lot of free stuff in there that you're not going to get paid for. So you got to be careful. I mean, Jason and I are consultants. We do this all the time and we have contracts after contracts. And Brent has been very good at trying to help us pull stuff apart so that we can see where we're making money and where we're not. Because sometimes we're pretty good at bundling also and then doing more than you get paid for. And so it's a business practice for any business. It's not just clinics, but in behavioral health, if you didn't go to school for this or somehow get some education in this space or have a mentor in this space, you really could be leaving a lot more money on the table. And you too are thinking, I need better rates. Maybe
Yeah.
not. Maybe you just need to know what you
Well,
can bill for.
and I think there is a nuance when we talk about Medicaid and managed care organizations when they manage a state's Medicaid, because the cost is actually in when folks drop off of Medicaid and then come back onto Medicaid. Because if they're seeing a provider throughout that period, which behavioral health is something that's people are going to continue to see a provider, it's when people lose their coverage and then come back on, it is more costly for that provider because they may go unpaid. And so those services that are paid then suddenly become inflated because it costs more. And so I think we have to remember that when you have folks coming and going off of the Medicaid rolls at a high frequency, that actually costs the entire system more. And we're doing something in
Right.
Iowa that a lot of states have been doing, and that's putting work requirements on Medicaid. And so, I'm kind of shifting us into data, but I pulled some articles that we'll put in the show links that kind of speak to that. Like, is that really an issue? And what happens when you start putting those work requirements on folks, and that can actually end up being more disruptive to folks on Medicaid. And if we look at the real population that that's going to target, it's going to be folks who probably can't maintain a full-time job anyway because disproportionately they have a behavioral health condition, and that's the reason why they're accessing Medicaid. And so there's some really good articles that I pulled for you all to kind of talk about how that how that plays out, and what the research tells us about that.
Right. One of the things that drives me crazy about rates, and we'll just talk about it here, is the higher rate that people get for intakes. And so if you're not careful, a poor soul has to do more than one intake at more than one place to get services because everybody wants to bill the intake. That should not be happening in our systems. I mean, there should be one
But
intake. And
only the
according to
first
Medicaid,
provider
there's
gets
only
the
one,
rate. Only one provider gets the bigger rate, and everyone else
right?
gets the lower rate.
That's the way it's supposed to be. And you're supposed to take that with them to someplace else. And that's the challenge that we're having is that first one, the first rate, they don't give them their assessment necessarily if they don't want to continue in that place and they need to take it with them. So then they can't get another assessment for a period of time because Medicaid's not going to just keep paying for assessments, which is smart. But there's this battle over that intake and that's crazy. And so, for the poor person trying to get help, if they didn't have their intake, or say they got the intake somewhere, but they can't get back in for services for a long period of time, they could go someplace else to get the services, but they can't, maybe that's not a mobile piece they can go with. And so we've got to be really thoughtful about that because just because, you think you make more money doing something, but do you really? Do you really? Because that takes a lot more time to do those intakes, which is why you get paid more. So everybody who thinks that, well, we want to specialize in these things because they get paid more, well, those often take more time than other things. So there's a balance about how much you're paid versus the time it takes to do things that you've got to be thoughtful about too. And if you're not good at time management, this is also a trick where then it becomes you think it's about rates, and it's really that you take double the standard time to perform X. And so the rate doesn't reflect how long it takes you, where the standard rate is a lot less minutes. And that's an argument I know therapists like to say, well, I don't want to do this length of time in my meetings. I want to go this length of time. And that's great. But just know again, back to your contract, how many minutes are you getting paid for? And so then you can't complain later if your rates aren't bigger. If you're the one going over minutes and over time and you just want to be paid more, that's not it because your contract is for the minutes that are in the contract.
or you have the wrong codes in your contract, right? Like,
Oh,
or
right.
you could have different codes that then would be different, or be able to use add-on codes or plus codes or up codes. There's all kinds of options, but you really have to understand what your contract says and what you're able to do based upon your contract. And maybe you're missing some of the things of the specialty care you want to deliver that actually is covered, but that both needs to be added to your contract. And then you also have to document reflective that you met that service that you're
Mhm.
delivering. And so, all of those are nuances that a lot of folks struggle with understanding. And, one of the things I think I found a great website that shared with mental health reimbursement rates by insurance company. And so we'll put that in
Mm,
the show notes as well. Because it's always good to have a comparison. I know many times we go to hospitals and we ask, well, they complain about Medicaid and rates. And I'm like, well, what rate would you need? Like we've been in states where Medicaid actually asks us, well, what rate would be better for the hospitals? And we'd go to the hospitals and say, well, what rate do you need? And they actually backed off and said, well, it's actually not the rate, it's the bureaucracy, or it's something else. And it ended up not even being about money. And so sometimes it's good to go look at some of these average reimbursement ranges. All this stuff is public accessible, where you could see by different insurers what their average rates are by code, by CPT code. And it actually breaks down which ones give a good payment, which ones are difficult to bill. It's really quite interesting, and I think, we've kind of started to have more of a national conversation about health insurance and about healthcare and about accessibility and how difficult that is. And so there's some actually really good behavioral health websites out there that kind of lay these things out for us. And so it's sometimes good to compare and see, where are we at? Are we, if we're on par of a national average, then maybe we need to be looking at some of those other things, and not
mhm,
just be going out and saying we need higher rates, because just because you get higher rates doesn't mean you're going to be able to solve all the problems that you
mm-mm,
have today in how you go
mm-mm.
about conducting your business.
We've had seasons in Iowa where we didn't have a mental health plan at the HHS level, where people at the top were saying, don't ask for more money because you wouldn't know what to do with it if you got it. And that's part of the challenges too, because when you're taking state dollars, federal dollars, you have to use them or you have to return them. And in the States, oftentimes, if then you return them, they're not going to give them back to you the next year thinking that you didn't need them. So you've got to be very thoughtful about, the monies that you're requesting, that you actually have a sustainable plan and not just a one-time situation, kind of pour the money in, because then it's like, how are you going to make that continue to work over time? And we've seen it happen over and over and over again in different states where they want the money, but they wouldn't know what to do with it if they had it. I know when our conversations up north with this particular state hospital, they couldn't even tell you what the budget of the state hospital was. So how in the world could you say then to legislators to their faces you needed more? More for what? You haven't even audited what you spent before. So how do you even know what it was to even know that you
Yeah.
needed any more money, right? That's just doesn't make any sense. So sometimes we have to make some sense with some of the things we're asking for. Another one we deal with in our state, I don't know about other states, but sometimes in the mental health space, people will say we can't do X service because of the rates. And sometimes my state will lock down on that, and every provider will say it in unison together. And I think they think that that means they can strong arm different rates. What ends up happening, I'll share the secret, is most states are smart enough now to bring in an outside provider from another state who will do it for those said rates. And you know what happens every single time, Jason? All these
What?
providers from our state say, well, we could have done that even if they have fought against you for the last 10 to 15 years about the subject. It drives me crazy. And so we've got a current one right now for nursing homes taking forensic care of those high level, either sex offenders or folks that have like a violent history in their past, folks though that need skilled level nursing coming out of parole. They need skill level, they need a high level of nursing. So they may be on dialysis, different things. And my gosh, you would think that we're asking just the worst thing ever for people. And I mean, and maybe I get it if you're in a small town nursing home and you don't want so and so in there with grandma. But come on, nobody in the state can do it. And super funny, we started having conversations outside of the state, and then somebody in the state heard about it and popped up and said, well, we think we could do it. Well, thank goodness. It's like you could have done it the whole time. So mental health does that. Nursing homes do that. It's just, it gets really frustrating because, again, none of that's about rates. It's like, it's about maybe other things, but it wasn't about the money itself because other people can do it. If there are organizations out there that can do it for the money that they're getting paid, what is the problem? Because Jason and I talk about this all the time. Workforce and money can be the biggest excuses for doing nothing in any mental health system. Those two topics always are like, well, we just can't do it because of workforce or money. And other entities are doing it at that same time with the same issues in workforce and the same issues in money. So you tell me what's wrong with that.
I think what you just said is right on, and we talk about this all the time, is identify the right problem, right? The
Oh,
problem isn't
yeah.
workforce and it isn't rates, but there are other problems that we need to fix in the system. If we don't talk about the real problems in the system and we keep defaulting back to workforce and rates, then we never fix the actual system. And this is where my frustration shines through all of the
Yeah.
time when I have to get called in with these groups of legislators and they ask me, well, why can't we do this? I'm like, you're focusing on the wrong thing. So let's get focused in on what you need to be focused on. Like, we can pull data and we can see the denial rates of Medicaid claims. And any service that has a 50% denial rate, I want to know why, because I think that's ridiculous. Is it the provider? I can't imagine all the providers are that incompetent that they're delivering the wrong service 50% of the time. And maybe I should believe that. I don't know, but it just seems like that in this day and age, when we automate everything, when we have IT solutions, we should not have 50% claims denied and then have to reprocess those, which takes extra people at the organization level, extra people at the MCO level, which increases everyone's cost exponentially. If we're focused on efficiency, then we're going to go where the data tells us to go. But those aren't the conversations we have, Renee. And I lose my mind having this conversation because I'm always trying to refocus people. Let's figure out what's going on in pharmacy or what's going on over here, because that's our problem. That's what's costing everybody money. But
Yeah.
here we are. That's increased rates, Renee.
I know, I know. And I think people just get so worked up about that and that whole rates thing. But, it sounds like Nebraska just got caught doing that, right? Where the reality is that they're top in the country and they're still saying, but we need more rates. They just got caught. And so their little party's about to end because that is probably not going to be received well by the legislature who's over there going, but wait a minute, that's not right. And so have they actually delve into the data to prove one way or the other? I don't know. But boy, those folks in those associations and those providers better have their data in a line so that they can go up and argue that, because right now it's looking like they're on the wrong side of that story. And that's never good because then you break trust with people going up there saying you need more, you need more, you need more, and they say, but really you didn't. So that's going to hurt your advocacy as we're talking through legislatures. That's not a winning strategy to be a good
And
advocate.
and to be fair, in that state, in order to function in the dysfunction that they have, they do need more money because that's the only way, that's the only path forward until the system corrects itself and creates the efficiencies it needs to do so that providers can deliver the services in communities, in rural areas, which are more costly, which it does take more effort, more energy, and it is going to drive cost. But when you're in such a toxic environment, all you do is throw money at it. And I think that's the challenge is we can't cut our nose off to spite our face in some of these situations, right? Is the dollar amount right? It might be, right? But we got to fix a whole lot of other stuff so it's even viable.
You just reminded me of a Michael Scott saying, cut your nose off to spider face. What's a
Yeah,
spider
there you
face?
go.
Sorry, I had to go there. So before we sign off this week, let's talk about the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. Gosh, this time of year is hard for me. I miss the sun. I miss being outside. Some days are so, so cold, I just can't do it. And so my self-care tip for myself is I am on the one hand looking for new indoor activities to try, to do some things to wind down and that are healthy for me in the winter months. But on the days when the sun is out and there's just a glimmer of some kind of heat, I'm outside. If I can pull it off and I can stand it even for a short time, I just feel so much better because this time of year, if I'm not careful, I'm just running from building to building indoor all day. And I can maybe just not really be outside at all. I don't have a job like Jason where he has a farm to have to go out, sit and, go out and about. I just don't. And so if I'm not careful, I mean, I'm really running to the vehicle, to a building, and just nothing outside. So I have to try to say, okay, well, how cold can I stand it? And oh, it's only 32, which sounds crazy for some of you listening, but it's only freezing. Only freezing's been pretty good around here. So I'm outside. If it's only freezing, that's not bad. And so only freezing and no wind is even more glorious. So it's like, on the windy days and it's 9 and wind, I just can't do it outside. So anyway, that's my tip is like go take advantage. The sun peeks out, get out there, enjoy that sunshine. It's good for all of us. This is the time of year we have the least amount of vitamin D because we don't get that natural sunlight. And so, your sleep may be off because you don't see the sun as much as you should. So that's my encouragement to everyone out there. And get out there and see the sun if you can. So Jason, any parting words today before we end this one?
This was my year to mix it up. I've got the new bike trainer sitting
Ooh.
behind me in my office, and so I get on and ride. I'm a Zwifter. So I go
Ooh.
on the portal, I'm riding against other people virtually, pedaling away on my bike. So I have converted to indoor exercise activities because I know getting out and running has started to get challenging. And so I complained about that for a long time, and I'm like, nope. I'm doing something about it. So my
Good
Christmas
job.
present to myself this year was, yep, getting the bike all hooked up, all heart monitor connected to my bike, connected to the big
I was cracking
screen.
up. I think you posted the other day that you'd been out like just around town and almost died. So I was like, oh, he's gonna really learn
I
to
did,
live
I
this.
did, I did 3 miles virtually, and I'm like, I haven't biked in 30 years. Like I still have a sticker on my bike from 1993 Ragbri, which tells you the bike I pulled out of the garage to put
Wow.
on the
Okay.
trainer.
You might need some
So
new equipment moving forward, but hey,
well,
that's a
I'm
lot of
gonna.
good.
That's why this bike became the indoor bike on the trainer, right? But
There you go.
yeah,
That's awesome. Well, today, folks, we talked about is it really, really about the rates or is it really something else? And there's so many other things that can be the challenges that are the real challenges to why the money's not working the way you think it should. So making sure we actually know what our contracts say, making sure we use all the up codes that we can, making sure that we know all the availability to get all the money that you're due, and then working on those systems to make it more streamlined so that your pay comes in on a regular basis. We've gave you lots and lots of good links in here today. If you want to go check out what other states are doing in the rates across different insurance companies, great information for you to have. So we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.